one of the questions that I was thinking about when we started Avanti was really about what exactly is it that we're trying to do? Like, why do this project? Why set up Avanti? There are lots of school providers in the country. What is it that we want to do that's different, right? So, and over the course of close to 20 years now, we developed a specific approach to that. And much of that is reflected in the Avanti Way, which hopefully you have all read and memorized. You know, we've tried to articulate it in there so that it becomes clearer and clearer, and over time, hopefully, it will become more and more clear, but also more and more practiced in terms of what we're saying. So, from the perspective of what was the gap that we're trying to fill in education, I always find it quite interesting when we speak to children, and now even in common conversations and wider social conversations, we talk about things like fulfilling our potential, right? You've heard this probably every day, something's like based on this idea. And when we talk to children, we talk about things like unlimited potential. You've got unlimited potential. And, you know, you can do whatever you want to do. And it all sounds really great, right? It sounds fantastic. But there's no, well, in a lot of those instances when people speak like that, there's very little substance to it. There's very little substance to what exactly do you mean by unlimited potential? Clearly, I can't jump and touch the ceiling. Like, I can practice for the next whatever number of years, but I'm not going to be able to jump and touch the ceiling. The laws of physics, well, the laws of physics will stop me from doing that. So what is it that we mean when we say unlimited potential? So there's this one gap around this idea of when we want to encourage a child from when they come to us and to the point at which they leave. So let's say from our nurseries are starting at age 3 and we're graduating year 13 at 18, right? 18 years old. So we've got them from, what is it that we're trying to cultivate within them that when they leave our schools, they've experienced something which sets them up for the rest of their life. And that's a tall order. And I think the gap in education really, from our perspective, when, you know, as we developed it, was one is around, so everyone talks about educational excellence. You've heard me speak about this before. So everyone talks about educational excellence. I don't think that's necessarily a gap in education in terms of the fact that everybody's focused on it. We may not be doing it, as in the education system may not be doing it to the level that we want it to be, but there's a focus on it. Character formation, I don't know, take a guess, you know, 20%, 50%, whatever number of schools in the country care about character formation. Now the question is, how do you change character? It's very nice to talk about character formation, right? We all want to be more grateful, more respectful, more empathic, more respectful, more self-disciplined, more courageous, right? With all these virtues that we can like recite, and the idea of character formation sounds great, and we want to make you resilient and independent and all of these catchphrases. How do you change character? Because I think, you know, if we get to reflect on this in our own lives, when we think about times when we've changed our own character, or our own character has changed, maybe we didn't do it, maybe some circumstance or something happened to enable that change, whatever. But whatever that situation, context, messaging, association, whatever might have happened, how do we try and capture the formula for that so that we can deliver that in our schools? And here's the short answer. The short answer is we don't really know, right? Because the research doesn't tell us very clearly in terms of what it is that changes character. Have you had that, like, you know, there may be times when we think for ourselves that I really wish I could change this about myself. But it's not so easy, right? Like even the things which are not related to character but are related to something more like tangible, like exercise. Even a simple habit like that takes significant effort to change. What to speak about, I want to be a nicer person. I mean, what's easier, to change your exercise or to be a nicer person? Like because some of it is involuntary, right? About in terms of how we respond to a situation. It's not necessarily like I've got a conscious response every time to every situation. That would be, impossible. So then there's a piece about character formation, and then there's the spiritual insight piece in terms of the gaps in education. So if educational excellence is 99% of schools, character formation is, let's say, 50%. And if we talk about spiritual insight, and I'm not talking about necessarily religious practice, so let's distinguish the two, right? So religious practice, yeah, probably, I don't know, what is it? The last quarter, a third of our schools in the country are faith-based. So let's separate that out in terms of religious practice. In terms of spiritual insight, in terms of who's cultivating spiritual insight, what does it mean even to say the phrase? Again, spirituality, spiritual insight can become a very easy catchphrase for us to be able to like ban around in terms of, it's important, spirituality is important, we want our kids to be spiritual, I want to be spiritual, etc., etc., etc. What does it mean? Oh, I don't really know. And how do I get there? I know less, so that percentage of schools that are focused meaningfully on spiritual insight, I think is very small. And I think that's one of the key things, which again was the gap in education that we were seeking to fill with Avanti. So let's come on to this point about spiritual insight and what does it mean? So we've spoken in a few different forums about how we're trying to define spirituality separate to a faith-based context, right? So as you know, we have schools which have religious designations, and we have schools which have no faith designation. And our approach to spiritual insight should be able to cover both of those types of schools, which means that when we say spiritual or spirituality, and when we define it, we're trying to define it in a way that's truly inclusive and accessible to anyone from any background, okay? On that basis, I've spoken about 4 aspects of spirituality, 4 defining characteristics. All right, so the question is, when we say spirituality or spiritualism, let's stick to spirituality. How do we define that? What does it mean to be spiritual? What do we mean by spirituality as a thing, as a process, as a path? What do we mean? What are the elements of that which transcend religion? So, for example, I could say, well, spirituality means to me going to the church and singing hymns. That's a religious context. Or spirituality means to me to be a nicer person. That may be a form of spirituality. So let me, since I haven't kind of gone through these 4, let me go through the 4 with you very quickly, and then I'll focus on one, and then I'll ask you a question. The 4 that I tried to boil this down into, the first one is around identity. You've heard me speak about this? There's some nods and some different. Oh, now you get it. So the first one is about identity, and the bit around identity is that we all have different layers of identity. Okay? Those identities that we have are contextual. We have a work identity, we might have a gender identity, we have a religious identity, we have a family related identity, a father, a son, or whatever, right? So like we have loads and loads, like unlimited almost, layers and layers and layers of identity. Okay? And a common feature of spiritual practice is moving beyond the layers of identity to get to the most fundamental layer of identity that we want to identify with. Okay, so to give you a sense of that, a lot of people would say that at a fundamental level, I don't want to go through it because it would take a long time, but you go through all the different layers of national identity and this identity and that identity, and you get to something, and it comes to, okay, we're talking about consciousness. right? So like consciousness at a fundamental level. So, and a lot of spiritual paths speak about this. So in religious language, somebody might speak about the soul, right? Or they might speak about, in Sanskrit, the Atma. So you can have different ways of approaching whatever you want to, and from a scientific perspective, they would speak about consciousness, right? So now the question is, like, in identity forms, the path of spirituality is when you trace back that layer of those layers of identity, when you come to what you identify as the source of that, the source of that consciousness, Atma, whatever it is for you, right? That process is a spiritual process. Regardless of how you go about it, that's a spiritual process. That aim is a spiritual aim, to come beyond the layers of identity, to come to your most fundamental identity. Now, why is that important? Can anyone think of why that might be important? Or useful? Forget about important. Why might it be helpful?
That drives your action, what you do.
Okay, so it sets priorities in life. Okay. Anything else?
It helps us to be better in all the other identities when we sort of
Okay.
understand our core identity. It helps to do different roles better than.
Okay, yeah, interesting. So that helps permeate the different things and roles that we play in the world and in life. Anything else?
It helps us understand each other.
Helps us understand each other. Okay. So, I mean, these are all great points, and they're all true, right? So, like, I think it does all of that. And there's another one which I'd like to bring out, which is that it also helps us be less superficial. Because with, like, if you think about something like a common phenomena which sits behind a lot of child well-being issues and adult ones, but, you know, in the context of schools, the focus, the hyper focus that's placed on external validation. So me relying on all of you to tell me how good I should feel about myself, that's a problem. So that whole dynamic of like superficiality, and in terms of how I feel about myself, how good I am, what self-worth I have, etc., 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 and whose opinion I care about, is a serious issue. And in terms of how resilient our children are, how resilient we are, and how happy we can allow ourselves to be. Because if I'm constantly thinking about what somebody else who I don't really care about and who doesn't care about me, if I'm constantly thinking about their opinion of me, that's an issue. So this idea about you don't have to be so wrapped up in each of these different layers of identity all of the time. Like, they can be situational, contextual, circumstantial, but you can move beyond that. That's not everything. So that's one, right? Is that clear? Identity? All right, so next time. So identity. The second one I want to talk about is that is spirituality as a buffer to materialism. So materialism is like, what I mean by materialism is like this constant push from the external world in. Now, whether that's through social pressure, media, whatever it might be, but a constant push towards materialistic thinking. And by materialistic thinking, we're talking about selfish thinking, to consumerism, to all the other various ways in which you might want to define materialistic. But the idea that spirituality, whatever it is, right? So right now, remember, in the context of spanning across different types of schools, faith and non-faith, whatever that is, that acts as a buffer to materialistic kind of processes and thinking and actions, is a spiritual practice. Does that make sense? Okay, I'm going to go into the third one then. And the third one is, well, I'll flip the order just because, anyway, bear with me. The third one is being connected to something that's has a greater purpose than yourself. That's an easy one, right? Because we've heard this many times. The idea that I want to have a purpose in life. And the idea that all the studies tell us also that that's a key element to actually being happy in life. That you're attached, or you're doing something that has a contribution beyond yourself. So as long as we're within, like, so when we talk, I mean, if I was say, how many of you want to be selfish? Nobody would put their hand up, right? But from a micro level, when we think about what does selfish mean, it means I only think about myself. And then the kind of circles of or domains of concern extend out as we become less and less selfish, right? So first I think about myself, then I think about only the people close to me, then I think about just slightly further away, etc., etc., etc. So is that clear? Greater purpose? Okay, now the fourth one, which is where the task is going to come in, so pay attention. The fourth one is, what is the fourth one? Oh yeah, so the fourth one is spirituality as a way of raising consciousness. Okay, so I'm going to speak a little bit about this because I want this to be really clear. We all experience fluctuating levels of consciousness. So we all experience how we're doing day to day, moment to moment, week to week, year to year, good days, bad days, up and down, like how we're feeling our highs and our lows, right? It's not a constant thing. Anyone feeling like a constant thing? So that's like it's like flatline, right? You don't want to be flatlining. So we're experiencing fluctuating levels of consciousness. One definition of spirituality could be, what is it that raises my level of consciousness and keeps it there? Okay, so when we talk about spirituality in this context, what we mean is that you can imagine a situation where you got wound up. Okay, you got wound up, you got irritated, you reacted. So you can imagine that reaction, that state of like reacting without really being in control, is a lower state of consciousness. Why is it lower? Like, what do we mean by lower? Any thoughts? What do we mean by lower and higher?
More selfish.
Selfish? Okay. So more selfish? Yeah. Sorry, you're going to say something.
From a reactive way.
Okay. So reactive. So a loss of free will, actually, because you're just stimulus response. Okay. So reactive, selfish. Anything else?
Ignorant,
Okay. So say a little bit about what do you mean by that?
just being ignorant towards our own feelings, being in that moment.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So good. Anything else? But you get the feel of it. Yeah. Go on.
Higher consciousness is, you have to think about low consciousness, instinctual, base instinct.
Base instinct. Okay. Yeah. Good. And so so then let me hear something about high consciousness. What do we mean when we say higher consciousness? What do we mean by that?
Just say self-awareness.
Okay. So self-awareness. Yep. Good. We're aware of ourselves and others.
Just like detached from the emotion.
Okay. So more deliberate or more rational. So yeah, detached from just an emotional response. You're actually thinking through the response now. Okay. What else?
Also sort of understanding that this is situational. I mean, this is, you're able to see it from a higher level. And
Yep.
That's just a situation, just that moment, right, which will pass. So when you're in higher consciousness, you don't feel like you need to react because, it's just transitional.
Yeah. Okay.
It's not very material, maybe, in the bigger perspective.
Yeah. So, okay. So I like the last word. So that perspective is kind of captures what you're saying there, right? So having a good, okay. So you get the sense of it, right? Now, you can imagine like how you guys came up with that very quickly, right? Very quickly. And it was kind of a consistent sense of what we're talking about. And this is what I mean by something that's inclusive and accessible, right? So like, if you can come up with that quickly, you can see it's intuitive in terms of what is it that we mean by higher and lower states of consciousness, right? So, and you can hopefully also see how, when we talked about identity, how that relates to this, because you get perspective, right? And how we talk about a buffer to materialistic type of actions, selfishness, and et cetera, and responses also fits into this idea. And this idea of feeling a greater purpose, being able to support this process of raising consciousness, because now you are acting in a way which is less selfish. Okay, does that make sense? So I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to break into groups of 3, and you can do that however you want. So what I'd like you to do is answer these two questions. So we spoke a bit around this, like trying to make these things real in our schools and in our own lives. And that means taking the leap, which is the scary leap, from hearing something that we like the sound of to doing something about it, right? So like I like the sound of exercising every day, but I haven't made the leap yet of doing it every day. So there's a gap. So in this session, we're going to try and narrow the gap and maybe even close it. So what I'd like you to do in your groups of three is answer these two questions. Okay. The first one is to help us move to this idea, to help us make spirituality a real thing. So if we're talking about it in kind of like stepwise, what is the one thing? So, and I want you to focus on this last point around the definition of spirituality, raising consciousness. Okay, so just have that phrase in your mind. We're talking about raising consciousness. So, like, what is it that helps, that I can think about in my experience, in my own life? Those things, and they can be whatever they might be for you, right? So, we'll come on to examples in a minute. But what are those things that have helped me raise my level of consciousness? Okay, so that's the first thing. And that can be however you want to define it. Short term, medium term, long term. That's up to you, how you want to think about it. It could be something practical that you do, like a nature walk or whatever, like different things that, like meditation or whatever that is for you. So what is it that's worked and what will you change? So if you could set your bar that this is what's worked for me and this is what I want to do from today going forward. And the second question, so that's one question. And the second part of this is that what can Avanti do to facilitate that? So the first part is, what do I want to do? What changes do I want to make in my life to help me raise my level of consciousness? And the second part is, what can Avanti do to help you fulfill that goal? Is that clear? Now, there will be, when you think about these things, please don't think about them, try and go beyond the first order or first level of thinking. Okay, so to give you an example, the last question that Gopi asked us to think about was, who's somebody that you appreciate in Avanti and why, right? That was the question. So that's an exercise in gratitude, right? So gratitude practice is one of the things which many people find is a helpful way of raising consciousness, right? So they have gratitude journals, they have gratitude, etc., practices. In order to be, so your first level of order thinking might be, okay, gratitude. I want to practice more gratitude. But try and do the thinking that goes behind that, right? So like to do gratitude really like in a deeper way than you can do in 2 minutes is, I mean, you need to be like pretty reflective. You need to allow yourself to be vulnerable in terms of the things that you're thinking about. You need to be able to kind of think through the moments in which you are ungrateful. There's a whole bunch of stuff that goes into that behind there. So within the short time frame, when you're thinking about the things that you feel like really raise your level of consciousness, try and get to the real essence of what that was. And when you're thinking about what is it that you're committing to do, that you're wanting to commit to do, think about it in a way that is going to be practical for you. That is real. Like, we don't want to kind of like just say stuff because it sounds good, like from all the, as I started today's session with, like, let's move beyond that and to try and make this as real as we can make it. So wherever that sits for you, let it be.